but I'm really excited to invite you to this first of a so far three-part dialogue that we are co-hosting with Lucy Bernholz and the Blueprint on aid, trade, and philanthropy. And really delighted that this will inform the expansion and the growth of Blueprint this year. So Lucy is here. And very great thanks to Enrique, Eddie, and Million, and to Jerry for hosting this. And I'm not going to take up any time before I hand over to you, Jerry. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everybody. It's so good to see such old friends and new people. And this group is growing. I won't do anything except be the traffic cop. I have very little to say, but we have three really prominent people who are doing and making waves and have a lot to offer, who are each coming from a slightly different perspective. We're going to start with Eddie simply because he actually made the call last week. Eddie is a good friend, and he's somebody who is a prominent figure in the fields of artificial intelligence and sports innovation. And I'll let him explain why sports innovation. You probably didn't think you were going to be hearing about sports, but Eddie, it's all yours. And please, what we really want is a conversation between the three of you, and then I'm going to bring in different parts of the audience, and hopefully you'll make my job as traffic copy easy. Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks to everybody for coming to this session. I feel a bit like an imposter here, Jerry, but I appreciate the invitation, and it's an honor to join the co-panelists. Just a little bit about me. As Jerry mentioned, I presently work at Columbia University as managing director for a new center for innovation in sports and AI. But in terms of my background, I was born and raised in Kenya, moved to the US for education, and I've spent most of my career working in education, economic development research institutes at NYU, working at Yale University on global strategy and global engagement for research development, and also working in philanthropy at Schmidt Futures, which is the philanthropy of the former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and his wife, Wendy Schmidt. Trying to fund moonshot science and innovation across the world. My deep passion is in talent and unlocking potential. I feel like serendipity played a very big role in me landing to where I am. And I don't think I was the smartest kid in a small school in Kenya, and somehow managed to achieve some really interesting things and experiences through my career that I feel very privileged for. And so when Jerry kind of reached out about this panel, it invoked for me a deep sense of curiosity and interest in this kind of metaphor that he used, the centenary moment, which is a moment of unique and kind of highly transformational change. And so for me, from a perspective that's rooted in education and trying to foster innovation networks and unlocking potential, this disruption of this moment is not just a threat, but an unprecedented opening for some kind of new approach that maybe integrates ideas and thought that has been on the periphery. I might say maybe in terms of framing just my ideas on this question, I might pose five kind of key points to help frame that. And the first one is, what I think is an imperative to embrace epistemological pluralism so that the true centerage that we can land at or arrive at is one that's centered around knowledge. And so what are the most, what is the biggest imperative here? And I'm thinking more about moving beyond a singular Western-centric system of development. And so is this centenary moment about being intentionally focused on creating new non-Western epistemologies or inviting them, recognizing that knowledge and wisdom and solutions are profoundly diverse and not necessarily universal from one place or geography. And so this isn't just a cultural sensitivity, but it's also about a pragmatic necessity for effective and sustainable transformation. Two, education as an engine for agency and not assimilation. My work in education reinforces that its true purpose in this context is to cultivate critical thinking, creativity, self-determination, and to empower individuals and communities to define and build their own future. And so it's about nurturing local agency, not assimilating into predefined foreign models. And I feel like this is where the true talent unlocking can happen, beginning to value the inherent capabilities in communities over maybe externally imposed skill gaps that are defined in different ways. And third, I think innovation networks can potentially unearth and amplify local genius and creativity, local ingenuity. And so innovation isn't something imported, it's everywhere. So the ubiquity of innovation, in my experience, in innovation networks, the most important and impactful solutions can arise from local contexts, leveraging indigenous knowledge systems, and adapting to contemporary challenges. And then fourth, from a needs-based to an assets-based kind of frame. Too often aid frameworks begin with a deficit narrative, what communities lack or don't have. And this fundamentally disempowers. And so I think this Enterage moment is demanding a shift to an assets-based approach focused on the immense human and societal capital already present. So unlocking talent for me means recognizing and investing in the inherent capabilities, creativities, and entrepreneurship within communities themselves. And then lastly, agency as a bedrock of regenerative transformation. So sustainable and regenerative economic transformation is impossible without genuine agency. And so what does that mean? When communities have the power to define their own problems, design their own solutions, and control their own resources, I believe they're more likely to build systems that are resilient, equitable, inherently regenerative, because the systems are designed to serve their own flourishing. So I'll stop there. But again, thanks a lot, Jerry, for the opportunity. I look forward to this conversation.
Great, thanks, Eddie. I appreciate it, and thanks for starting us off. Enrique, can I come to you and just have you react a little bit, but also bring in your perspective here?
Sure, thanks, Jerry, and thanks for the invitation to be here with all of you today. Just to give you a little bit of context of where I'm coming from. So recently I was at the State Department as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, which you may have heard is now being eliminated, given this current political moment. And then before that, I was part of what I like to call the Development Industrial Complex. I was at the U.S. Agency for International Development, managing citizen security programs in Central America. And then before that was with a USAID implementing partner in Colombia and Serbia, managing human rights programs, as well as support to civil society activists in Serbia. And, have spent a little bit of time in think tanks, and I'm currently now with the Seattle International Foundation, which provides funding to human rights activists, independent journalists, and human rights defenders in Central America. So that's kind of like my lens and my perspective on this issue of foreign assistance. And then interestingly enough, yesterday I was on another panel talking about the authoritarian threat, both here in the US and in El Salvador. So in the last 24 hours, that has been sort of my focus and mind frame. So coming into this discussion, I just give you that context of where I'm currently at thinking about these issues. So, I'll just start by saying that I've always been a critic of U.S. foreign assistance throughout my career, even given where I was and where I worked, largely because when you're in the bureaucracy, you see a lot of the deficiencies. And when you're in the implementing partner world, you also see them as well. When it comes to things like, how USAID did procurements for programs, the whole localization strategy, which often fell short. the consolidation of programs within a small group of contractors based here in the United States, and oftentimes not a very clear alignment with U.S. foreign policy, which interestingly is one of the criticisms of the Trump administration. And so there were a lot of reform issues that many of us in this industry would see as needed. Now, of course, what's happened is that USAID has been completely dismantled and is part of a larger political project of the Trump administration to essentially go after institutions that they don't agree with. And USAID was an easy one to attack at the outset by Elon Musk and Doge, essentially because there was no constituency for foreign aid in the United States. And that became painfully obvious as the dismantling went forward, because within our Congress, you did not see a lot of support to essentially save it, even though it's a congressionally mandated institution and the executive does not have the legal authority to dismantle it in the way it did. There were some, congressional representatives and senators that did speak out, but I mean, it wasn't like a full-throated campaign to really try and save the agency. And so from my perspective, the dismantling really fits in within this larger political project. And you've now seen it in terms of how the narrative has been created that USAID was also aligned with supporting, the overthrow of regimes or meddling in other democracies. And interestingly, those always seem to align with the kind of ideological perspective of the Trump administration, even though USAID was also working in countries that you would do, supporting activists and others in countries that you would think would align with this administration, like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iran, for example. And so, but we're in this weird moment now in the United States where that does not seem to really factor in, because our foreign policy has become so transactional at this point, and a lot of it, particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, related to our migration and deportation policies. And so we're in, to say the least, in sort of a very interesting moment when it comes to where we go now forward with foreign aid. The big discussion now is the reorganization of the State Department and how this will all fit in within this new State Department bureaucracy, which many of us who have worked at the State Department sort of laugh, because there's no operational capacity to actually manage foreign assistance. And so, the idea that they think they're going to hire, 200 people out of the 10,000 that were laid off to somehow oversee this is rather absurd. At the same time, they are cutting a lot of the budget, reducing it essentially to humanitarian assistance and global health, which is another concern for many of us who have worked in the human rights field, that a lot of the democracy and governance programs are being cut, because those are all seen, again, from this current administration as being too political in nature and not something they want to support, which again is ironic, because we've got a Secretary of State who's a Cuban American and who has very strong opinions about Cuba, where there's a lot of programming involved on democracy, rule of law, and governance. But again, we're in a weird moment. So maybe I'll just stop there. Look forward to
I'm sure, Enrique, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions about some of the things you've said, but thank you for giving us that backdrop. That's really very helpful, I think. Milian, we're coming to you, and a lot of this was provoked by this article you wrote about when what happened to USAID happened, and some things you said about what these implications for Africa were. So over to you, Milian. Welcome.
Thank you very much. My name is Milian Belay. I'm the General Coordinator of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. It's a movement of movements. We have farmers networks, fisher folks, pastoralists, indigenous people, youth, women, faith-based institutions, consumer organizations. So my role in the past decade was to build this network brick by brick, and the constituency is about 200 million Africans, who are part of this group, and our members work in 50 of the 55 African countries. So our main focus is agroecology. Agroecology and under the bigger umbrella of food sovereignty. So we've been fighting for the last 2-3 decades with the Green Revolution narrative. Basically, this narrative says that Africa cannot feed itself without agrochemicals, without GMOs or hybrid seeds, without reorienting its agriculture to market-led agriculture, without technology, and all that. And one of these institutions who were promoting this narrative is USAID. I'm not saying this because I've read this somewhere, but because I personally experienced it. I think I have participated in 5 or 6 meetings where USAID actually worked to water down the biosafety protocol agenda in Africa to make it open for those companies who are selling GMOs into Africa. It has directly influenced also so many of our policies, and also through other organizations like the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. As its name implies, it's a Green Revolution agenda. So it is a very sad event because it happened uh, very fast. And because of that, a number of internally displaced people, even in Uganda alone, more than 1.3 million internally displaced people, a number of HIV patients, doctors, nurses, a number of research initiatives were impacted. In my country, Ethiopia, the impact was even huge. So there is so many tears shed down because of USAID. It's not only USAID, and other aid agents were also shocked because they were working in collaboration. So even though I don't like or I didn't like USAID, the gradual demise of USAID would have been better, or the reorientation of its agricultural activities. I personally have written to USAID, to Samantha Power 3 times, even asking for a meeting so that they don't support this kind of activities in Africa. But we were not provided that space. It's not only USAID, there are some philanthro-capitalists in Africa. One of them, or the biggest one, being Bill Gates. So there's a lot of funding coming to Africa. I think at some point their support to Africa, they said was $6 billion, but out of that, 80% stayed outside of Africa. For universities and other reasons who are supposed to support Africa. So, as a civil society organization, as a movement, what we are for is African-based future. Our farmers are not dumb. They know what they are doing in agriculture. But it doesn't mean that we are romanticizing also what they are doing or the seed that they have. There is always an opportunity for conventional science and farmers' knowledge to work together. So the question is, would the demise of USAID and other institutions, other countries have stopped also supporting Africa? I mean, reduce their support. The British government, the Netherlands, and other countries are also restructuring their budget to economical transactions. So in this period of crisis, do we have a solution as Africans, and where do we have to go is a big question. The answer is yes. If we have the proper policy orientation and governance and mobilization of the people, there are solutions for Africa. I'm talking more about agriculture because the majority of African people, their livelihood is based on agriculture. Some countries more than 80%, in some countries more than 70%, the majority more than 70%. So agriculture is very much important. Our economy is based on that. If we fix that, then we can have the sovereignty that we are seeking, where we can get healthy, nutritious food without impacting the environment, culturally appropriate food. Cultural appropriateness of food is very much important, without impacting the environment. Also, justice at the center of the movement. So, Jerry, thank you very much. I said too much, but thank you.
No, you didn't say too much, but I think we have the beginning of a conversation about what does one do in this context. And I'd like all three of you to think seriously about what the other has said, and maybe we can have another go at this. But Lucy, I'm going to come straight to you now and ask you what you made of that opening so that we don't keep this a male-only panel.
Good morning, everybody. I'm calling from the East Coast of the US, where we are in full-blown military assault on our own people, not on where I am, but in the rest of the country. And so I appreciate the clarity with which people can even think on this day. But so here's two questions back to the three of you from what I heard. And I should preface by saying I've spent 30 years of a career working inside of institutional philanthropy and adjacent to it as a critic, as a very critical participant in the entire enterprise. And what I hear from all of you is that there are, in the aid part of our three-part discussion that Impact Trust is hosting, aid, trade, and philanthropy. Thinking about aid, there are, from what I heard from Eddie and Enrique, some very clear similarities to the last 30 years in institutional philanthropy in the US, in that there are clearly people in the space doing the work who are very critical of the phenomenon, who understand that the role of local expertise and the importance of agency. I thought Eddie was particularly compelling on that. I agree with it. I hear you I don't know a great deal about aid. In philanthropy, we say similar things. There's similar rhetoric, and it just continues to not happen. And I have become convinced over 30 years that one of the key reasons institutional foundations don't change when they know what would be better for their grant making is that fundamentally institutional foundations are financial vehicles for rich people. That's what they are. They may be staffed by people with an interest in improving the world, but the enterprise itself is merely a product of the financial industry and the legal industry. And that doesn't even want to be agreed to by the participants in philanthropy who are trying to make change, because they don't actually want to admit that they just work for a rich person's financial portfolio. So that's a source of the difficulty in making the change. May not be the only one, but I think it's an important one. And as I hear you speaking about foreign aid and development, again, not my area of expertise, I'm curious as to what, if there are, and what they might be if they are, these analogous obstacles in the aid world. So that's question number one. I also heard all three of you use some variation of the word constituency. Million in the very compelling way that he's built this network of over 400 million people, if I heard that correctly, network of networks, clearly a constituency. I mean, that is a lot of people aligned around an understanding of Africa for Africans and a future driven by African ingenuity and expertise. Whereas Enrique and Eddie, I heard more a discussion of the lack of a clear constituency to continue the work, at least in the U.S. congressional constituency for the U.S. foreign work. So my question is about constituencies, is about stakeholders, whatever language we want to use for this. And Eddie, I'm sorry, Million, specifically to you, you're facing this moment that movement scholars tell us movements build toward, which is you've gone, for a moment at least, potentially, from fighting against a system that had a very clear name, at least, and approach. That system gets dismantled for reasons having nothing to do with what it was actually doing, I believe. Enrique, you can tell me otherwise. And now you've got this opportunity. So how does a constituency of antagonistic battle become a constituency of implementation? Is my question. And it's relevant, I think, across domains. It's not only certainly not only in food sovereignty or only in the example of a sudden murder of an American institution by a crazed person. So let me leave you with those two questions. What is the real institutional resistance that comes into play is question one. And number two is how do you go about re-energizing a movement, such a broad movement from this antagonistic battle against an identified enemy to now you've got a moment, let's implement, let's go, let's fill the vacuum.
Well, thank you for that really profound set of questions. I'm going to throw it back at the three of you, and then we'll open it up some more. But let me just say, I'm reminded in Lucy's questions with something I went through at the end of COVID. Not that it's ended, because I ended up looking back at the opportunity. Nobody could have designed an experiment on that scale or would have had the courage to. But the speed at which we didn't learn the lessons, didn't take advantage of things, didn't rethink things, and went back as fast as we possibly could to life as it was really a painful moment for me when I realized that people really had not taken advantage of that. But less about me. And Eddie, I'm coming back straight to you, and then Enrique, and then Million to respond to Lucy before we widen this up.
And I first, I just wanted to react to a comment from Alan Fowler, who mentioned kind of reacting to one of my first points about local epistemologies. And so the comment says, one of the points I made resonates with an ontological perspective on gifting originating in Africa and eventually thousands of generations of years later fed philanthropy as we are speaking about it today. And one thing, I mean, first of all, Alan Fowler, what a kind of giant of an intellectual in the space. And one of his books, The Virtuous Cycle, actually kind of influenced some of my thinking in grad school a long time ago. So Alan, it's good to see you here. I think that concept of a virtuous cycle that can be imbued with local community-based insights and knowledge is a really powerful one. But I think Lucy does challenge us to think about, how entrenched these systems that have existed are, and what are the powers that keep them in place, and where are those kind of interstitial points of weakness that can help destabilize these systems in ways that can contribute to creating new beginnings. I feel like, it feels like there's a moment here, just given the rapid and in many instances traumatic retreat and withdrawal of these systems of aid flow and capital flow to emerging economies around the world creates both significant structural challenges, but also just unique opportunities to invite new thinking, new commentaries. And I think Million's been kind of contributing to helping us to reflect on what this could represent, given and trying to do so in the midst of crisis is difficult and complicated. But I think this is a conversation that needs to continue to happen to introduce and bring in new voices from the grassroots, from the ground. I don't think I have the proximity and the contextual knowledge of precisely what has been suppressed for so long over the years through these structures in terms of kind of knowledge, insights, agency, and capability on the ground. But I believe that there will be some green shoots that emerge in the wake of the devastation that's wreaked by this disruption. And so I feel cautiously optimistic. I feel like we need bigger and broader, more inclusive conversations and discourse. But I'm also excited about what the future could portend after the dust settles.
Enrique.
So let me just react to something quickly that was also in the chat about how U.S. foreign policy has always been transactional, because I think it also relates to the questions that Lucy made. So yes, that's true. It's always been transactional. I think what we're seeing now, though, however, it's individualistic transactionality by our president, right? So there is a difference. And of course, USAID has always sort of fit into sort of U.S. foreign policy goals and objectives. However, now obviously we're in a different moment with its dismantling. So, the argument that we make from this side is we've lost an instrument of our soft power and influence that was beneficial in different ways. It was benefiting people in other countries on the ground. At the same time that, again, it was a projection of U.S. foreign policy, right? So there's always that tension between, the American ideal of like wanting to do good in the world, but at the same time, always the transactionality of it. And that then also then results in how it was operationalized, because you essentially had a system of implementing partners, contractors, many of which based in the United States, who managed a large percentage of these funds, and partly because these were the regulations that were put into place by our US Congress and how to manage those funds, with the idea that this would avoid fraud, waste, and abuse, which is ironic that that's what the Trump administration used to dismantle USAID. It's probably one of the most audited US agencies in the federal government. When I was there, I can't tell you the number of briefings that we would have to do for Congress and hearings, and for our budgets, which were usually had to be approved in a bipartisan fashion. So just to give you that context. And so, going to the question though then of constituencies, this is again where it was where its dismantling fits within this larger authoritarian project of the US, which again was to create a narrative around how we were going to save money from eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. And, foreign aid has always been one of those issues in the United States where people feel like we spend, 20% of our national budget on foreign aid when it's really less than 1%. But it fit a perfect narrative for the administration coming in, and particularly Elon Musk when he started Doge to set out on this kind of sledgehammer approach. And so what happened is, again, among the American public specifically, there really was no constituency or a real lack of knowledge around what USAID did, but also, interestingly enough, the benefits to the US economy, right? Again, in the self-interest of an American taxpayer, when you look at things, for example, where USAID is buying $2 billion worth of food commodities from US farmers in the Midwest, that's significant, but not a lot of people knew about that. Or the number of research grants given out, the number of small veteran-owned businesses that were contracted also to do this work. And so, and that, affects every state across this country. But people didn't know about that. Again, no constituency, not even the representatives on Congress at times would have that much awareness of kind of where USAID was also touching their local economies. And so I see it now. Now, what I tell people is I think there is an opportunity now, at least within the United States, to build this constituency around U.S. foreign assistance and what that means and the benefits it brings both for the U.S., our economy, our foreign policy, but again, for the rest of the world. And to see this as an opportunity to actually see if we can create something different, because I would never advocate to going back to the way things were. Again, having been in that industry, I've seen, the hundreds of thousands of dollars that would be spent on a bid, for example, on a request for a proposal for a $50 million program somewhere in the world, and the amount of resources that would go into that. But again, that is procurement law in the United States, right? So it's not just a USAID problem. It's the way that the entire US government is set up to purchase commodities or, contract out, right? So there's larger issues also at play. They're not just USAID. So it makes it difficult. It made it difficult in the moment to reform a lot of these issues. We would get in these constant debates around procurement issues and how to diversify the pool of potential grantees or to make it more localization strategy, which every administration would come in and would talk about that, and often fall short, for the most part, fall short, I would say. So that's, again, from my perspective, coming from the US and trying to situate this also within the current political moment that we're living in, because that really has major bearing on where we go next with all of this.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think one of the things you've said, two things. One is on the whole issue of constituency. I'm curious whether, in fact, one of the problems is that it was impossible to build that kind of a constituency, given the mismatch that you describe between sort of the stated intention and the reality of an organization that's having to play by a set of rules. And so it brings me back to this notion of we're playing the same game, but with very different rules in different parts of it. And that creates complications. Million, what do you think about this in terms of the constituency?
Yes, it's a very, very good question. But with AFSA, we are following a different strategy from the beginning. We always say that we work with two hands. On one hand, we fight, and on the other, we provide solutions. So for example, we were saying that agroecology should spread and should be farmers-based movement. So any narrative or any approach against that, we fight. But we have communities of practices of a number of farmers from all over Africa coming together and discussing, innovating. And we do have even a connection with the Indian project called Andhra Pradesh project, a famous project on agroecology. So we do that. Seed issue, we are fighting with these draconian laws and regulations which have originated from in Europe and coming to Africa, like OPOV 91, which prevents farmers from saving their seeds, exchanging their seeds, even sharing with their friends and whatever. For that, our solution is farmers managed system. From the African Union to the country level, we are fighting to put that regulation. We even have a campaign which is called My Food is African, which has 4 legs. We work on food policy, both at the African Union level, at the country level, and also we celebrate food. We celebrate seed all over Africa. Celebration as a weapon of mobilizing people, and bringing also other actors. We strengthen local actors. A number of movement building from the ground we do. So even we use the climate space, the climate UNFCCC space to integrate agroecology into the adaptation and the mitigation mechanism. So that's what we do at the policy level on ground. So it's not only fighting, we are providing solutions. We ask questions for how do you use the force of the market to transition to healthy and sustainable food? and we started to consider these small markets, which are territorial markets, you know. So I'm just giving you an example. It's not only fighting, it's also building something. But saying that USAID or few other institutions are not the only actors who are still operating in Africa. There are a number of corporations coming, a number of governments, a number of philanthropists, you know, maybe related to your question, maybe, you know, promoting the same kind of narrative that USAID is promoting. So the thread is still there, still live, still there, you know, seeing as everybody has a solution for Africa, as you know. So people come with a number of solutions, but yeah, it's not specific to one actor. There's so many actors. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm very curious about this idea of a narrative that continues to essentially talk about what Africa needs in a context where perhaps we're coming to a point where there's something Africa might be able to offer. I mean, some of the work we're doing with Tamsin on the poly crisis. I will bet my bottom dollar that there are people on the continent, people I know and people who I've worked with, who have a better understanding of what is needed when when the rug is pulled out from under you and when things change significantly. And I'm just curious whether there's any of you see opportunities to recognize and validate what it is that people who are on the receiving end of a lot of this actually might have to offer in a context where the rest of the world will have to do some very, very adroit and clever U-turns. But that's just a question. I'm throwing this open. Is that okay? Are we ready to go to the public? So anybody who wants to ask a question or make a comment, all you have to do is wave, or if you're not on camera, then you have to put your hand up in this electronic way, and I'll call on you. So please, I'm assuming there are questions and comments and feedback.
Samantha raised her hand.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Samantha.
First of all, I just want to thank the panelists. I think it's been a good intro. I'll make comments and ask questions at the same time. I think I'll start with the last question, which is, does Africa have something to offer in terms of responding to the poly crisis? So I think based on the article that was shared with the invite, there's this idea that there's the Western way of doing things. It's more structured, it's more orderly. And then there's the Ethiopian, and Million, you can confirm or correct me, chess, which starts with the first play is about establishing dominance. And so it's a bit chaotic. You're moving around just trying to get a position of strength from which to continue playing the game. And so when you talk about this poly crisis, it's interesting to me, and I don't want to go into cliches, but it's interesting to me, even in this discussion, where you have a group of individuals who are saying we've now, as the US or as the global community, we've now gotten into a period of crisis. Yet, for certain of us, we have been in this constant period of crisis. And so it's not a new crisis, it's just a new crisis for some people. And so when you say that the US has always been transactional, and then if you are, and Enrique, I'm not pointing to you, but I'm sort of referring to what you said. If you are with USAID and you represented USAID and you believed you were doing something meaningful, so it doesn't seem so transactional. And the things that fall through, that's the price of doing business. we'll improve, we'll do it better next time. But for the people who are being dropped, that could be a life lost, a livelihood lost. And so it's interesting to me that there's an acknowledgement on a wider scale of what is happening. And for some of us, it has been happening for a longer period of time. So that's maybe what I believe we could offer is maybe a different perspective, because we have had to live with this kind of toxicity or toxic context and have had to figure out a way to keep moving. And then the second thing would be, and maybe this is to address some of the things that came up at the beginning in terms of agency and just the different activities we're doing to try and improve life for a large majority of people who are adversely affected by food security, health, just the basics, because in Africa, for many of us, it's just the basics. And so I think my thinking around that would be, we do need to get the resources into the hands of the people who can get it done. And that's why the center edge, to me, if you're looking at the analogy or the metaphor, this idea of moving quickly and securing a strong position, to me, is more hopeful because the orderly system will continue to enrich the same people it has always enriched, because they have the power to reorganize themselves and they have the resources to get it done. And so they keep moving. And so even a term like agroecology, Million could have used it to, tirelessly over a long period of time to create this network. And all you need is somebody with the resources. For example, I was at the Science Week and we have the CGR, which is the larger organization, and they're now talking about agroecology. I have a postcard here where they have, and somebody might prefer to still give money to somebody they know as opposed to somebody who's untested. And so I think we need to think about that. How do we move quickly and get a stronger position from which to engage?
Thank you.
Because, yeah.
Thank you. That's very powerful. Thank you very much, Samantha. I'm not going to come back to anybody to answer you just yet. I'm still waiting to see if there's anybody else who wants to make a contribution or ask a question. I thought what you said was very powerful. Silence is good. Does it mean you're thinking, or does it mean you're not? Or does it mean you can't hear me? Yes, go ahead, Sean.
Hi, good afternoon, Jerry. It's been a long time, many years.
Many years.
Anyway, thank you, and thank you to the panel for those for those insights. I just wanted to feed on
Sean, you've gone silent.
Oh, here I am. Sorry, I've been speaking to myself. Sorry.
No. We heard the first part. We did.
Oh, you heard? Oh,
yeah.
Oh, cool. So I just wanted to sort of feed in what Eddie was sort of referring to around agency. And if I understood you correct, Eddie, you also sort of saying that this whole sort of focus on assets forms the basis of meaningful agency, which is quite important. And I want to reflect in working with grassroots organizations across African countries. Many of the grassroots organizations are sort of wondering, what is this fuss all about around US aid? And even some of the global north countries that have reduced or are reducing their aid because they never had access to this funding in any case. And even if that funding was coming closer home, it would come via or go to an international NGO or to a more organized NGO that were not necessarily in a sense, and I want to use these words, were not necessarily in the sense inspiring or growing agency at the grassroots level. And so if we understand this, then, Jerry, in your comment on polycrisis, the question then emerges is how do we then grow and inspire agency at the grassroots level in a meaningful way in the context of the sort of intersectional hypercomplexity that we face around the issues that stand before us, and also based on the belief that Africa has much to offer, but how do we harness this? I just wanted to throw that out. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Kate has a question, Jerry.
Go ahead, Kate. Hi, Kate. Good to see you.
Hi, it's good to see you too. I will turn on my camera despite the fact that I just walked the dog in the rain and I don't look that great. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for convening this. It's just amazing to see you again. I wanted to pick up on something that Sean was saying about the civil society and NGOs on the ground not necessarily feeling the withdrawal of US aid. And Sean, I agree with you 100%. And so I feel very ambivalent about what's going on with US aid because, on the one hand, when I worked in private philanthropy, I was often on the other side of the conversation saying actually US aid probably should be significantly reformed or dismantled. And so even though I've just spent the past 18 months working on a US aid project, I'm not 100% sorry about the loss of the agency, but I think what's really important in the way that this was done is that it was done with ill intent. It was done to make US foreign policy even more transactional than it was before. It was done because this current administration does not care to acknowledge responsibility in the world and does not care to follow the rule of law at home. It was essentially, I think, in our political process, a blueprint for the dismantling of other agencies. That's a problem because it means that not only do we have to sort of explain that to the constituency that you're talking about in the chat about people who do view that responsibility and who do want to provide support for humanitarian aid. It means that effectively we don't have anyone to speak with on the US government side. And it makes no case to other bilateral and multilateral donors who operate in much the same way. Right. So I think that we need to be quite concentrated in our advocacy and clear in our messaging if we're to use the opportunity of this moment to sort of rethink aid and not simply lament the political process that's happening in the US right now, if that makes sense.
It does. I think that was really very helpful. Thank you, Kate. I completely agree with you on the points you made. Hi, Lena. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Apologies. I have to be off video at the moment. I wanted to sort of piggyback on what Kate just said. I think one of the issues that I haven't been seeing enough discussion around, not in this group, I mean, I think it's been amazing, but in the general narrative and in the general discourse is exactly what you said, Kate, that there was ill intent in the dismantling of USAID. It was violently done, and the number of people who have been affected. I mean, Boston University has a tracker running, and at the moment, 4 months on, nearly 300,000 people around the world have been estimated to have died because of the removal, the very, sort of abrupt removal of USAID funding and programs. And that's something that I just don't see discussed often enough. The ripple effects, I love what Sean said about the fact that USAID funding and, sort of the Swedish fund, Scandinavian funding, UK funding, Canadian funding, whatever, doesn't often get to local organizations. The question of localization is too often about, sort of reforming and changing the way INGOs operate on a local level, not about advocates, community-based organizations, mutual aid organizations, sort of collectives on the ground. Who are the people doing the actual work? A lot of my work in the last 2 or 3 years has been directly on the question of power shift and how you shift power away from Western headquarters, et cetera, including resources and money, to truly local organizations. And the harm of this present moment to the ripple effect of the dismantling of USAID is not being discussed enough. There are ways that local organizations are activating and working right now with ADESO, which is this amazing African organization who's rethinking sort of power and mutual aid and community-led narrative in ways that are really, really interesting. And you see that popping up all around. So that's the discussion that I want to see more of.
Thank you. That's really very helpful. Eddie, I'm coming to you, but there are some really fascinating comments in the chat, by the way, and maybe I'll be calling on some of the authors to speak. Go ahead, Eddie. You're mute.
Sorry, just very moved by some of the comments and reactions. There's a couple of things that popped up for me was on this question of remittances. And, you know, for sub-Saharan Africa, I can't speak to other regions. In 2023, they reached about $54 billion per year in 2023. And that's far exceeds overseas development assistance and foreign direct investment, which was around 30 billion. And so I just want maybe to draw attention to almost like a power attribution problem where remittances are invisible power. They are largely unseen. They're seen as individual, informal transfers for consumption, family support. But is there an opportunity here around rethinking how to engage both the diaspora and creating new products, whether it's diaspora bonds, remittances linked financing models that are diaspora-led, and thinking about new frameworks and platforms for engaging the diaspora in these conversations at this moment of retreat, and a new opportunity to rethink how we continue to provide support at a critical moment.
Alan, you've been putting some really powerful comments in here. Do you want to say some of this?
Well, I can. I'd like to thank Eddie. I was embarrassed in my chair, so thank you, my brother, for that. Well, I mean, there's a lot that I've put into the comments thing, and I'm not sure which one. I mean, Eddie has just picked up on the remittances. So this invisible transfers that are quite substantial and very much more local agency enabling they don't need monitoring and evaluation systems. The misuse of remittances is only one phone call away, if you see what I mean. So there's a lot of self-regulation in remittances and other attributes of the quality of the money. It's not just the quantity, it's the quality of the money. And one could argue that a lot of the international official aid has been low quality, unresponsive, predictive, linear, all the stuff that we know. So I mean, I've been in this world of aid for almost, actually more 40 years almost, no, even more. And I have tried and tried as an activist, as a consultant, as an advisor, as an academic, to try and help a whole variety of organizations, official, unofficial. I worked for Ford for a while in the Nairobi office, so I've had some sense of the philanthropy world. And now I'm doing philanthropy at the business school in Wits, along the lines that Eddie responded to around ontological views of how aid can, how gifting is a much better way of looking at it than philanthropy, but that's a different issue. One of the things that I've learned, and it's a disappointing thing, is that no matter, for example, you're helping to help an organization, an NGO, big or small, with its strategic planning. And the rationale is there, the data is there, everything is there, but so little moves. And I've only seen NGOs and move when there's enough trauma. And one can perhaps look at what's going on with USA, but with the official aid system more widely. as a trauma-inducing opportunity for those that are related to it. And I sort of take the point that there are many NGOs, I think Kate was talking to, that have no relationship with aid at all, let alone US aid. There are 230,000 registered non-profits in South Africa. Okay, only 60,000 of those fulfill the compliance requirements, but that's the number. Now, none of those are aid dependent in that way, in a foreign aid way. So I'm not sure whether we need to look at this, and it sounds like, what was the name of the advisor to Obama, never let a good crisis go away, or something like that. And I'm just wondering whether the rethink that's needed needs to be as dramatic as what's happening, and not incremental. And then you get the problem of how do you mobilize horizontally? And I do think that we are lacking enough attention to the horizontalisms of philanthropy, if I can put it that way, or in my terms, gifting. And then the verticalities dwarf, but they actually don't dwarf in number, but they dwarf in narrative. What is actually going on in the real world of poor African, Asian, Latin American life? So I suppose one of my own hang-ups or plaidoyers is, let's try and think horizontal more than vertical, because it's where vertical has agonistic power. It's vertical, it's horizontal, sorry, it's vertical that has agonistic power. It's horizontal that has non-agonistic cooperative power. Can we think along those lines more, and how to foster collaboration horizontally rather than improving the mechanisms of being vertical? I sort of really think we're past that, is my own personal view. Thanks, Jerry, for the opportunity. I'm sorry if I've wumbled on again.
That's okay. We're all going to. This is not an easy one. I want to come back to Enrique at some point because he's been hearing a lot of criticism. I think some of it justified, some of it completely unjustified, and maybe needs to react. But I thought Lucy's comment in the chat that at least strikes a chord with me is I've always been in love with the rotating credit and burial associations that Africa has so much of. If you want to look at African institutions that have survived, that have continued that throughout, that despite colonialism, from Cape to Cairo, from Lagos to Addis Ababa, people depend on rotating credit and burial associations. In Ethiopia, we call them Udus, Ukubs, Maradaja Mahabers. In South Africa, they call them Stokvels. This is one of the most powerful organizing and mostly, strangely enough, female-led organizations that exist on the continent. And it's been the one thing that actually has, throughout history, been something that people have recourse to. And where people have begun to put resources close to them, they have been very satisfied. And as Alan says, it's only a phone call away. It's very easy to know if things haven't worked. There are institutional mechanisms for getting at it. And I'm just struck by that and the lack of trust we have in essentially in development aid because of all the kind of complications around procurement, unfairness, bias, the politics, and so on, so that we're ending up making things much more complicated. When I started working for Save the Children in the 1980s, one of my colleagues invented a 2-page document we all used for our community development work. They called it the log frame. It was the easiest, simplest, most beautiful way of figuring out what people wanted and whether you could deliver it. The European Union now publishes a 27-page memo on how to fill in the bloody thing. Never mind how big the complicated the log frame has become. But we've taken really simple, useful things and made them very complicated to process. And it seems to me that the institutions make things more complicated. But I thought that challenge, can we imagine a country that does its development aid differently? Is there one? Is there one that actually does this without the kind of hoopla that we are so used to? Enrique, can I come to you to see if you want to react?
Sure. So let me just say, first of all, this has been a fascinating conversation. It's great to hear the comments and the questions, particularly as someone who's been kind of immersed in this storm here in the U.S. on U.S. aid. It just also helps give me perspective on a lot of this as well. So I appreciate it. I mean, your question, Jerry, is interesting. However, at the same time, again, this is the dilemma that I see, is that we're currently having this conversation within a political moment in the U.S. where many of us feel like we're fighting for our democracy within an authoritarian administration, right? So foreign aid has been politicized to further that authoritarian project. And so at the same time that we want to have this discussion about a legitimate one about reforming U.S. foreign assistance and what that looks like going forward, it's now so heavily politicized within this current context that it makes it difficult to even think of, what does that look like in the future, particularly when, the irony of all this, that so much of the criticism, again, about fraud, waste, and abuse has created this narrative now that almost makes it harder to go back to a conversation of like, can we do this differently then? For example, can aid just directly fund local organizations that don't have a legal persona or don't meet all the compliance requirements, as opposed to going back to the default, again, of large implementing partners and contractors? I can't imagine Republicans right now buying into that idea, right? Which is ironic because, again, there actually might be some commonality between both the parties on like where we want to reform, but because of the way this discussion now has morphed, it's gonna be a challenge to bring it back, and that's where I think these conversations and others to help kind of direct the thinking on this is going to be so important, and to bring in the outside perspective, outside from the U.S. in particular, because we, being here in this system, get obviously very U.S. centric in how we see this from a U.S. foreign policy perspective, or how we view, American humanitarian support in the rest of the world, et cetera. And so it's often hard to have, these conversations with a much more broader perspective on that. And so, going back, I think, to Lena and Kate's comment, this was done with ill intent. And so, again, this is, for many of us right now, we're sort of just in the battle of like, can we restore any semblance of it that hopefully at a later point we can build back on it? And I think, but in the interim, we do have to be thinking about like, what does it look like to do it differently? And where do we have to break some China going forward with regards to the regulations that Congress has been set up, all of the earmarks that, U.S. aid was 80% earmarked, which made it very difficult to have any flexibility to do much of anything else, right? So when I say all of this, again, that having been somebody who was with an aid and as an implementer, though, there's also a lot of good that was being done as well, right? I was on programs where there was life-saving assistance being provided to individuals, or human rights defenders without support would be in an even more precarious situation. And that's what I'm feeling now as I talk to people that I've worked with throughout the world that are now feeling that abandonment and lack of trust. It's so, it's a challenging time. But again, I think I tend to be an optimist, but at the same time as a realist, I think there is an opportunity to try and carve a new way forward for sure.
Million, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
No, I'm fine. I'm just thinking about how we can decolonize aid and what we actually mean by colonizing aid. And I'm also asking myself, why has Africa become like a graveyard for so many initiatives? I think we should ask. So many money, a lot of money has flown into the continent, but little change. And why is that? So Yeah, I don't know whether people are asking that question. I'm also wondering about, what the technological advancement in the North is going to do, especially in the area of AI as a disruptive force, it is a technology that's not originating from our side of the world, and what is the implication of that? Because there's always politics in technology, there's always a power relationships in technology. What would this technology mean for us? Just thinking around that, sorry.
Absolutely, and we've bitten off a great deal in this conversation, and frankly, I'm in awe of how the three of you and those of you that have made comments have structured this. We've got about 15 minutes before we have to basically end this, and so I want to try and build on a couple of things so that we're not just stopping cold. And I'd like very much for us to think about what are ways forward. And it may be that we have to have this conversation massaged in a different way, because I think so many important things were said, and we were covering the whole spectrum, right? We were doing, it was an ambitious take. My instinct is that there is some very serious rethinking, reinventing going on all over the place, partly because people are faced with a calamity of a crisis, but also because people are beginning to see that opportunities need to be taken and things need to be reimagined. And one of the things I think might well be what do people do around their institutional responses to crisis? Because I think the world is going to be tuned in to how it is that people respond to things. And I think, I don't know if anybody's, I'm sure there are people doing research on this, but it's looking at what the impact of shutting off aid has done to people. What does it do to communities? What does it do to constituency? I think are fundamental questions. I'm going to ask the three speakers to come back. I'm going to allow two people to speak before then. One of them is Michael Gibbons, who's had his hand up patiently, and the other then is Lucy. So just Lucy, I'm coming to you next, but Michael.
Hello, friends. Thank you, Gary. Fascinating conversation. First of all, I'm very glad, Million, that you're here illustrating, representing to us the presence across the world of the alternative we seek. Mutual assistance associations of all different kinds, and how they build up, they federate up to scales and power, rather than turning that upside down, which is what aid is all about, and it's a fundamental problem. The big issue is structural inequality cemented into place in a global system. After World War II, we shed colonialism and then landed neocolonialism and neoliberal colonialism in its place to maintain a system of structural inequality. So how do we need to turn I think we need to turn our attention in two directions. One is the concept of tapas. There are plenty of alternatives to unregulated global capitalism and the dominance of corporate and financial power over everything in the West, over everything else. So we need to turn our attention to revisiting the struggles around more collectivist, socialist governance at the subnational, national, and global level. And then we need to seed space for the proliferation and growth of grassroots movement-based sources of social innovation, solutions, safety nets, and then generating innovations that can be spread that are represented by million. I see our attention needs to be split between exploiting the current crisis to revisit governance models and not give up on our tentative explorations of socialist models in the early days of the European Union and so on, the kibbutz movement and others, which we then gave up on because of certain things that happened in modern history. And I think we need to seed space for the innovations of our colleagues like Million around the world. A plug for an example, another Ethiopian gentleman, Fasil Miriam, has invented a local organization based in Kampala that raises block grants from international donors for child and youth programming, and then he regrants that money to clusters of African CBOs in East Africa that invent child protection solutions that support vulnerable children and youth. He's building a movement. He has about a $20 million a year budget now, big block grants that he then aggregates and reprograms to help clusters of organizations do their strategic planning, their learning, and their spreading of ideas with each other. So that's a stopgap measure in the existing system, perverting the existing system. But his experiment, Million's experiment, are a future of social solidarity around the world among the most vulnerable, and different ideas about global governance would support that idea as a new framing of human rights.
Thank you, Michael. Lucy, I'm coming to you.
So a couple of things, and I very much appreciate what was just said, and all the examples have been very helpful in this conversation for me, who's not from this space. But I want to go back to what Samantha said toward the beginning of the conversation and what others have built on. And I think this idea, if we are going to take the space to imagine better futures, we have some guiding principles that seem pretty clear to me. We're talking about horizontal organizations, which are sort of by definition somewhat decentralized. There's a peer-based element of them. They're right-sized. They may then federate, but they seem to be right-sized to the problem they're aimed to work on. And they're well-networked or federated or whatever. We know these things. The digital revolution of the last 30 years has allowed some new versions of those things to emerge. And it's helpful, I think, perhaps to understand some of where those fights have been fought in terms of locally horizontal and then very, very centralized in the hands of about 5 white men. So there's things to learn from digital, but I don't ever look at it as a solution to anything. But I do think, what if movements of the mass and scale, such as what Million has described, which is truly impressive, in their work of celebrating and building and policy making and capacity, were also engaged in using the system's formal recognition powers, the legal codification procedures, to recognize these horizontal groups and to put in place the things that we could further discuss that prevent outsiders from messing up that horizontality, because I don't think there's anything white people from the West are better at than screwing that up. And the NGO and the NPO were perfect examples. They're deliberately vertical organizations. They're not the right fit. It's a square peg in a round hole. And so how do we build on what we know of mutual aid and these horizontal organizations, the burial associations, the co-ops, all of which were only as recently as the 19th century smushed out of existence in the US and became vertical corporations. They're part of that epistemic pluralism that was spoken about at the beginning, I think, is recognizing and demanding the recognition of these different structural forms, that the flows of money can then be better controlled by those who are actually the experts in doing the work. So that's, I think we have this group and others have the beginning of what could be imagined to be better. And we've seen this happen. We've seen the B Corp movement, the co-op movement. Co-ops have never been destroyed as hard as capitalism has tried. They still exist. Can we carry forward some of that then takes the local expertise and formalizes it in the system that is designed to crush it? One opportunity. And then the other thing, just because there was talk of AI and digitality, I think after 30 years of thinking about this really hard, you must own and control the system, or it will own and control you. And it's as true of AI as it is of Donald Trump's personal money-making schemes now masked as American foreign policy. And it is happening. There are plentiful examples in Africa of Ubuntu-informed AI systems that could be then designed to be owned. And one of the nice things about practicing this governance stuff on the digital, although this moment is somewhat past us, is for the most part, policymakers don't understand what they're giving away. And so there's a real opportunity for communities. And there's multiple examples of that where we could transfer that into other domains. But more important, I think, is that expertise that's already there and has been there for thousands of years, becoming the rule of law. Make that the law. Get rid of the NGOs. Make the horizontals the rule of law. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Very optimistic. Makes me feel very optimistic. So thank you, Lucy. I'm going to ask the three of you, that's Eddie, Enrique, and Million, to sum up or to close. We have 6 minutes, so that's 2 minutes each, no more. If I had a microphone I could switch off, I would, but I can't. So I'm relying on your good behavior to just do this in 2 minutes. Please, Eddie, go first.
All right, no, thanks for just a really enriching conversation. In concluding, I'd just say three things. One, agency is not a buzzword, but it's the absolute North Star for a regenerative future. And I feel like, we are compelled in this very difficult transformational moment to confront a fundamental truth around, how do we create a sustainable, dignified transformation that can emerge with agency, the power to define, to decide, to act, resting unequivocally with local communities and individuals. And so that's an imperative. Two, second, the African diaspora, for example, from the African context, is an undervalued nexus of global power. So there's an opportunity to think about how the flows of finance traditionally can be disrupted, and the diaspora could represent a really unique way for bridging financial, intellectual, and social capital flows that go directly to those whom they have strong lived historical connections. And then lastly, on the technological piece, I appreciate Million's point and Lucy's comment as well. There's tremendous promise in this Promethean moment of technological revolution. And I think it hinges on how we build those systems. How can that innovation that's happening in this moment prioritize digital and data sovereignty? How can we frame the construction of these systems to have provenance and ownership in communities, local communities, and ensuring that there's a digital future that's designed for and by people from far-flung parts of the world and not just the global north. But I think, this is a really interesting conversation, and thank you so much, Jerry, for the rest of the panelists for the opportunity and the guests. Thank you.
Enrique.
Great. Yes, also thanks for a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this morning. I would just say, going back to Samantha's comment about, this is not a new crisis. It just is for some of us. I couldn't agree more, 100%. And I think with this current moment that we're living in the United States and with the dismantling of USAID, I do say that it does provide a new opportunity to think differently about how we do it and how we structure it, at the same time that we're trying to save what little of it is left. And so this is the challenge that we have going forward. At the same time, how to translate all these great ideas, things that we've talked about today, into policy proposals that can actually influence decision makers in our Congress, who ultimately will be the ones that need to be persuaded to save budgets or to try and salvage whatever is left of USAID after this this current budget negotiation that we're going through here in the US. So there's a lot of things in play, obviously, a lot of different moving parts to all of this, as we're also, as part of this discussion, looking at ways that we can improve the way that USAID assistance has been employed throughout the world. So look forward to the ongoing conversation and being part of this this network. Thanks.
Million.
Thank you very much again. Thanks for inviting me and share this stage with really brilliant people. Eddie and Ricky, really appreciate it. And I think Michael Gibbons, you're talking about Fasil. Not sure. Yeah. Okay. It's fantastic. Two things. One, I think, as I say, maybe it's my world. I think in Africa, we have to control our food system. Very, very much important. The good thing is the COVID and also the war between Russia and Ukraine has shocked so many of our governments. Now people are talking about sovereignty, food sovereignty. And Trump and the withdrawal of USAID is also adding to that. So food sovereignty is important. The good thing is we can demonstrate that we can feed ourselves. So there is a lot of effort to try to control our seeds, our land, and our water. But through agroecology, we can fight that and as well build it. It is possible. We have so many examples on ground, and it brings people together. It builds resilience into the system also. So that's my conviction and the conviction of our group, and that's what we are doing. Thank you very much, Gary, and thanks again for inviting me.
Thank you. And it's really fantastic to see so many of you. Thank you for participating. You know that we have another one of these lined up on trade. It's a sequel in a way. So I think, Tamsin, you put it in the chat. So everybody can see this in the chat box. You will get a copy, obviously, of this recording. And please help us grow the group, because we need more people to be paying attention to some of these issues. I am in awe of what Enrique, Eddie, and Million had to say. Lucy, thank you for the optimistic and critical take. And I really enjoyed the comments from the floor. I hope I didn't drive this too fast and too shallowly. Thank you. Tamsin, do you have anything you want to say?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much. Firstly, just thank you to everybody, and thank you, Jerry, to you. You drove it perfectly.